All right, good afternoon, everybody. Glad that you were here. How's drill going so far? All right. Well, great. So I'm Colonel Travis Walters, Vice Wing Commander. Of course, today we're going to do a little interviewing 101 for the Air National Guard. We're going to videotape this so that the resources will be available for our folks that are not able to be here with us today. So let me ask you this. How many of you over the past 5 years have done an interview for a job or a rank in the Air National Guard? All of us? Almost all of us? How many of you wish in some respect that you would have done that interview somewhat better? Maybe there was something you didn't like about it. How many? Are the chiefs raising their hands over there? The colonels raising their hands right here? The chiefs? All of us are in the same boat. All of us can use a little bit of extra help along the interview path. And that includes me. I've done probably 4 or 5 interviews over the past 5 years. And I always leave the room thinking, well, there's some things I did well. These are a few debrief items that I could have done better. So hopefully today, all of us will get a little something out of this. Now, everybody has a handout. We're going to go through this handout in the first part of our training here today. About 7 years ago, when I was a squadron commander in Fort Worth, after watching my more junior ranking enlisted folks struggle through interviews, I decided, well, let me just put together a handout. Let me try to put together a little class to help out our folks learn how to interview better. Because corporately, we don't have the Air National Guard, This Is How You Interview book. Anybody have that book? You can give it to me if you have. Oh, no one has that book. So this is what we're going to do here to kind of compensate for maybe the resources that aren't out there to help you do Air National Guard Interviewing 101. So as we go through this here today, we're going to start out with me doing the first 15 minutes or so, just walking you through the handout, do a little teaching. Then we're going to bring up our expert panel of folks who have and we found folks that are really old, experienced, to be able to have done a lot of interviews and then given you a lot of advice from a lot of different areas. So I'll ask them a few questions and then we'll go on to open it up to the audience to allow you to ask them even more questions. So hopefully today's hour will be time well spent. So as you look at the handout, the first thing is what I call the 6 P's of life. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. And that is true in life and especially true in the interviewing world. And so I broke up this handout into kind of chunks and segments. This is the day before the interview, the days, the weeks, the months before the interview. What should you do? I want you to prepare well when you walk into an interview, when you are preparing for the interview when that is assigned. So that's the big picture, number one point of feedback when you go through the interview. And so as you look at an interview, all the rest of what we're going to talk about is how to prepare well for your interview. So when you look at your uniform, your physical appearance when you walk in the room, this starts days before. So really in 2 ways do we want you to be ready for an interview. The first is AFI standards. So in most cases, you're wearing your service dress. So make sure your service dress and all the buttons and badges are all in the right place. One thing we normally have sitting in front of us is your virtual NPF RIP. So I don't even have to think about how your ribbon rack needs to look because there's a picture right there for me. So I go, they don't match. Why is that? So those are one of those things where, especially for the top 2 ribbons, if you have an MSM on your virtual NPF RIP, and then I look at you and the highest ranking ribbon you're wearing is a commendation medal, and I go, why did you not update your stuff? So those simple things will help you be ready to go for the interview. And then the second part of that is not only that what the AFI says for you to do, but secondly, do you look good? And what I mean by that is you may have shoes that are in AFI regulations, but are they shined extra pretty, extra nice? Your hair may be in grooming standards, but is it really squared away? Have you taken the time to really make sure you are totally, completely, 100% squared away when you walk in the room? Now next, I want you to do your homework. So there's a lot of different ways to do homework, but I want you to really research either that job or that next rank that you are going for the interview? Do you talk to the person that currently holds that job? Have you talked to people, researched what it means to hold that rank? Have you gotten into Air Force regulations to help prepare for whatever you're interviewing for? So the Air Force just released a brand new Brown book, 16 May 2022, a 28-page book called The Enlisted Fort Structure. So for those of you who are enlisted and want to know what NCO responsibilities and senior NCO responsibilities are, there's a book out there that codifies and tells you what that is. So if you're walking into an interview for Senior Master Sergeant or Tech Sergeant, man, it'd be good to know what the Air Force expects of you and be able to have some knowledge of that. There's also a brand new Blue Book, and that's 16 pages long, came out in May of 2022 as well, that talks about our Air Force core values. So those are the types of things as you research, as you dig down and try to figure out what this job entails, what this new rank requires. Those are the kind of things that we want you to do. Now, the next thing, critically important, we want you to prep answers for your questions. And not in a way that you just memorize some rote thing, but we want you to put a lot of thought into that. And so in the fall of 2012, when I was transitioning from the active duty to the Guard, a lot of people said, hey, you're going to do a lot more interviews in the Guard than you did in the active component. Is that true? Anybody who's transitioned over? I mean, we interview everything all the time. So the questions that are on the page that I have written there, or some version of them, I took a lot of sample questions, ones that are commonly asked, and I typed out my answers to those questions. And 7 pages later, single space, lots of notes, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is what I typed out, and I still have the handout here for me in 2012 to help cage my mind. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Why do you want this job? Tell me about a time where you had a great accomplishment. All those kinds of questions. And then by going through what took a good bit of time, I really got prepared for the interviews that were coming on. So what we're talking about here is to take really, hopefully, weeks-long preparation. Spend evenings, hours and hours typing this stuff out, and then you kind of get caged in your brain where you need to be. Takes a lot of time, but the payback on investment for interviews for years to come will be very helpful. So what we also, as we're looking at the day before the interview, we want to highlight things that we really care about and we want to communicate. So for me, I was the state public affairs officer here in Texas for about 3 years, and I did a lot of national level interviews. And so there were times, whatever question they were going to ask me, there were things that I was going to say in the interview no matter what. And so for you, going into an interview, you always want to answer the question directly. Don't dodge questions, but we want to take the opportunity to make sure that what your talking points are, that those get conveyed and interwoven into the answers of the questions that they are asking. And so if you want to stress because you did your research and you see a gap in the job that you're being hired for in technical competence, they really maybe they're having TCTO problems, they're having tech order data issues and compliance issues, and so you want to really stress that you are a technical expert in the job that you are applying for. Well, I want to make sure going in that I get that interwoven into the answers that I give. So that's the day before, the days before, the weeks before, the months before, and you can start that stuff now. When we get to the game day, the big interview day, we want to do 3 things when it comes to connecting with the board when you're going into the interview. We want to connect with the board in terms of ability, interest, and rapport. And those are 3 different areas to connect. So the first one is to say, I can do the job you're asking me for. I can serve at the rank that I'm going for, and make sure that you identify that you have the ability to do that. The next way to connect with the board is to talk about interest. So it's one thing to say, I can do the job. It's quite another to say, I want to do the job. So you know what I'm talking about? Talking about that enthusiasm, that spark in your eye that says, I'm in it to win it. I want this job. I want to be in this unit. I want to be in this wing. I want to serve at this rank, doing the thing that I am interviewing for. Thirdly is rapport. Now, I've seen people that have demonstrated in interviews, and I've done many, many, many interviews over the years. I've seen people that show me they can do the job. They show me they want to do the job, but sometimes this third thing takes people out of the running. And that's, are you a good fit for the job or the rank that you're interviewing for? So if you've done your research on the back end, or on the front end, rather, and you know what they're looking for, you know the nuances of the unit, the position, maybe the intricacies that involve going to the next rank, then you can speak to, are you a good fit? Do you have the rapport? Because in the Guard, if we're going to hire you for a job, for instance, we know that we're going to have to spend the next decade dealing with you. We've got to decide, do we want to sign ourselves up for that or not? So you want to show, hey, you're a good interpersonal fit, you work well with people, you're not going to cause a bunch of drama and problems. So the next thing we want to do on the day is make sure timeliness is at the forefront of our mind. So one way that we do that is by showing up on time, better yet early. And then the next thing we want to do is make sure that when we're giving answers to questions that we don't ramble. So I've been sitting in an interview before where a dude took over 10 minutes to answer one question. And it was painful. I mean, very, very painful. And so for me, and most people don't do this, but for me, if you walk into a board and I'm the board president, in many cases, I will say to you at the beginning of the board, this is a 30-minute timed interview. I will be asking you 7 questions, and the timer will start at the beginning of the first question, and upon your completion of the answer of the 7th question, the timer will stop. That's the timing. Or if you were in the middle of that whole rigmarole there and you hit the 30-minute mark, the interview is done. You're done talking. So that kind of forces folks to kind of cage themselves to have that. Now, if many people don't say that and don't put on that restriction at the front, they're certainly thinking it because they don't want to spend an hour and a half listening to you talk. They want to see that you are able to concisely package your answers and go from there. So if you think about what 2 to 3 minutes is, people speak about 150 to 180 words a minute. So when you do your work and type out your answers that we certainly don't want you to memorize, but if you kind of think through, all right, if I spend more than 500 words answering this question, that's probably too much. That gives you a good litmus test there of timeliness. So we want you to answer questions. We want you to make eye contact. So normally someone asks me a question. There's multiple board members. I say, all right, here's the first person I'm going to talk to. And then I'm going to look around the room, make sure I make eye contact. I connect with folks, that rapport thing. And then I'll follow up looking at the person that has asked me the question to finish it up. Now, one thing we didn't talk about on the time before the interview starts is really doing a good look at the room. So for many of the interviews we do here, we do them in the wing conference room. So if you're not in the wing conference room all the time, maybe the day before, and this is something that I do even at more senior levels, I'll if I have access to the room beforehand, I will walk into the room, think about, all right, here's where the board members are probably going to sit, this is where I'm going to sit. Let me think through reporting in, and let me think through reporting out. Because 2 things are definitely going to happen in the interview. The first one is the interview is going to start, and the second one, the interview is going to end. Those are the 2 things that's going to happen in the interview. So if you are ready to report in and think through that, and then you just get a familiarity and a comfort in the room, and it makes you better prepared to engage with the day. So the next 4 sections on your handout, if you look down there, are going to be the 4 types of questions. So there is no way possible for me to give you every single question that you're going to be asked. But what we can do is give you buckets of questions so you can think through how to answer them. So the first bucket of questions is the know thyself question. So you should be prepared for, tell me about yourself. Why did you apply for this job? What makes you qualified for this job? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Those are common questions that are asked, and you should be ready for them. Now, if you really do the introspection of reflecting on what you bring to the table, how you add value, then hopefully what you're doing in answering these questions beforehand and thinking through them is building a toolbox for yourself that when you get an off-the-wall question, you're able to reach into your toolbox and pull something out of it to be able to give an answer. So if somebody asks you a completely ridiculous question like, hey, given your skill set, Colonel Bean, what kind of animal would you be if you were an animal, and why would you be that way? And you're like, that is so stupid. I don't want to answer that question. But instead, you got to sit there with a smile and answer the question. You go, oh, I'm a honey badger. Honey badgers just don't care. Maybe no, don't answer that way. Maybe instead you give a good answer, not the honey badger answer. Maybe you give the answer of, in my toolbox, as I have to think off the cuff here, loyalty and dedication to the Air Force and to the wing is what I have. Man, I've been here for 10 years. I bleed blue. I have a 147th Attack Wing tattoo on my back. That's me, and my loyalty and dedication. So maybe I go, okay, well, I got to pull something, out here. Let me take loyalty and dedication and say, all right, well, maybe I'm like a golden retriever because I am loyal and dedicated to the end. Something like that. So hopefully you're not asked ridiculous questions like that, but you also have to prepare for a question where you have to think on your feet, where there's no way that you could have guessed that question. And on almost every board I've been on where I've been the interviewee, not the interviewer, there's always a question that I didn't exactly anticipate or have the answer to. I just have to go to that toolbox to get it. So that's why preparation is important. So there's know thyself questions. Second type of question is accomplishment questions. So in preparing for accomplishment questions, what I want you to do, for those of you who have been in for a little while, like 7, 8, 10, 12 years, you should have enough to take about 10 accomplishments and be able to articulate those well in the BAGAR format. So if you look on your handout, BAGAR is bottom line up front, context, actions, and results. So for example, I say, all right, tell me about an accomplishment you had and why you're proud of it or whatever. And I say, all right, I developed a new aircraft inspection process that reduced downtime by 20% and increased weekly sortie rates. The context is the next part I go to, where I'd say, well, this was important or significant for a couple reasons. Number one is because we had an impending deployment coming up we had to prepare for. And number two, we had fallen behind the ACC standard for the ISO timeline. So as a result, we had to clean that up. It was a team effort, but there are a few action steps that I took to try to make this better. The first is I adjusted the work schedules in my section to maximize productivity. And then secondly, I realigned how the aircraft flowed through ISO to again, maximize that productivity. And the fourth step in the BAGAR thing is, as a result, we succeeded on the deployment, and within 2 months, we got back into the ACC standard for timelines. Make sense to everybody? So if you have this big toolbox of accomplishments that you've done, you can pull those out and be able to answer questions accordingly. So in terms of accomplishments, you also have to think through the weaknesses and failure kind of questions. So this would be one where I would just encourage you not to dodge questions. So if somebody asks you, hey, Lieutenant Martinez, tell me about a failure you've had and what you learned from it. Now, tell me what you think about this answer. Well, sir, it is important to reflect upon failures, but I feel like this job is more about success than failure. So let me tell you about a success I had. Good answer or bad answer? That's a bad answer. You just dodged the question. You've just supremely irritated the colonel sitting on the other side of the table, right? So you want to make sure that you answer those questions directly, and so you want to think through weaknesses and failures and things like that. Number 3 type of bucket of question that we would be asked is a process methodology question. So any question that starts out as a how, you want to think through, all right, well, they're asking me about how I think. They're trying to get down to how I process information, what steps do I use to accomplish whatever I'm trying to accomplish. So how do you motivate others? How do you build a team? How do you deal with difficult people? How do you solve complex problems? All those kind of things fit into that category. So, for instance, how do you manage complex projects? Well, first, what I would do, step 1, is I define the problem and try to understand the desired end state for the completion of the project. Then secondly, I'm going to get my team together and we're going to have a brainstorming session to think through logically how we're going to attack getting to the desired end state. And then after that, step 3, I'm going to divide up into the task into smaller parts and assign it to the best person on my team that can work that task. And then step 4 is I'm going to go ahead and finish up with following through with each of those people that are working those tasks until we get to completion to that desired end state. So it doesn't have to be as clean or as crisp as that, but if you think through how you do things, all we want to see is testing how you think. Now, how many of you have been asked a scenario-based question in an interview? Look around, almost all of us. So what would you do if someone reported a sexual assault to you? What would you do if someone showed up late to work that you supervised? What would you do if someone had a suicide ideation? Well, all those things, if you go through the process methodology and give some credence to how you think through how you handle things, well, you should be able to pull out of your toolbox to discuss those things. And by the way, if we give you annual Air Force training on like how to deal with suicide ideations and things like that, suicide prevention training, then there would be some expectation that because you get that training every year that you would be able to pull a nugget or two out of that training to maybe be able to answer a question, especially if you're a senior NCO and officer and have some leadership responsibility within the organization. All right, number 4 is the world in which we live. So we talked about know thyself, we talked about accomplishments, we talked about process methodology questions. Final one is the world in which we live questions, which is in your little stovepipe, in your little section, in your piece of the world, you might be an expert. But what I want to see, especially if you're ever sitting on a board with me, is that you are able, on a question or two, to think above and beyond where you sit in the world. You're a part of the wing. You're a part of the Texas Military Department. What's the wing focus on? What's the wing commander thinking? What is the Adjutant General of Texas thinking about? What are his problem sets? You're also in the U.S. Air Force. So what is General Brown and the Secretary of the Air Force thinking about? All those kinds of things. And so if you're able to speak a little bit to up and out kind of things, then that can be a helpful thing. And sometimes you'll get those questions. If you were king for a day, what would you do? Tell me about a big national security problem, things like that. So when you have answered and kind of thought through those 4 buckets of questions, that will better equip you to answer whatever question you get thrown into on a board. Well, now we get to the close. So a lot of times folks think through the beginning, they think through answering questions, but they don't really think through, all right, I gotta close this thing out, I gotta shut this thing down. How are we gonna do that? So once we're done asking all the canned questions, there's a few different things that happen. Sometimes, oftentimes we say, hey, do you want to add anything? Is there anything else we need to know before we make this decision? Well, guess what? You need to have a little bit of closing talking points to be able to address at the end in whatever fashion you see fit. So maybe your talking points, your main talking points, you want to hit one more time. Maybe you want to thank the board, whatever those things are. And then sometimes we'll say, hey, do you have any questions for us? Oftentimes that's a question that's asked of you. And so if you say, I give you a few examples there, hey, what's the next milestones in this process? What's going to happen from here? Give the board president a chance to kind of educate you on how long it will be until you hear back. Will you get feedback from the board? Do you want feedback? All those kinds of things. So then think about getting up, standing up, reporting out. Remember, if you report in, you got to do what? You got to report out. Okay, so those are the things. So this 2-page handout's very concise, but we wanted to give that to you today so that you would be able to take that with you and be able to be more successful than you already are in your interview process. Now we'll post that online as well as this video so you have it. Now let's get on to the next stage of the training. This will be exciting. Let's get our board panel up here. And I'll introduce them right quick as they're rolling up. So you all are familiar faces to all of us. You have Lieutenant Colonel Biff French, who is our Deputy Ops Group Commander. Lieutenant Colonel Kelly Bean, who is our Force Support Squadron Commander and previous Security Forces Squadron Commander. And then you also have our current Command Chief, Chief Maxey, and then our previous Command Chief, Chief Z. A few months before he retires, a little last bit of wisdom for the team here, so we're excited about that. So I'm going to ask them a few questions and give each of them a chance to answer, and then we'll open up to the audience to give you all a chance to ask them questions. So first question, and we'll start with Colonel French. In your respective positions, what are the top few things you look for in a candidate when chairing a hiring or promotion board?
Depends. It's always an answer, right? So there's a number of things that we generally look forward to seeing in candidates. Most of which, especially on the operational side, is just the technical ability to be able to handle whatever it is platform that you're going to go into. So on our side, if you're going to go to the MQ-9, we expect you to at least understand what the mission is, whether you're supporting the mission, whether you're flying the mission. On the RC-26 side also, we're looking for the same kind of stuff. So technical knowledge is huge. One of the things, though, that I think I look forward to the most in a candidate is what you pointed out is longevity. If we're hiring someone that we're going to have around for years, how well do they get along? And I know it's been kind of back and forth. Should people rush the squadron, the unit, the wing, whatever? For me, I think it's silly not to visit some place that you're looking at being employed and or eventually considering people to be your family. If you don't ever go visit, then how are you going to know, one, as the interviewee, that I will actually like working there, and two, you got to get a feeling of the layout of how people interact with each other. So even if it's not the interaction, because you're going to possibly get a cold shoulder type interaction, especially if it's super busy, regardless of where you go. But if you can see the kind of interaction that they have between each other, then that may give you a pretty good idea. But for me, it's I want to see some technical knowledge, and I want to see them be able to get along with people.
Awesome. Chief.
I would say effort and attitude. I would like to see a candidate come in front of the board and explain to me why she has the attitude and what she can do in that next position or in at that next rank. So find a way to convey to me how your past success is going to allow you to be successful in the next role, and that attitude kind of goes to the rapport aspect that Colonel Walters was talking about earlier.
Similar answer, just that eagerness to be there, right? And I think Colonel Walters talked about it during his piece as well. Like, are you interested? Do you want this job? Because this is an investment that we're making too, and just having that can-do attitude that you are going to do what it takes, and in and above what the squadron's going to ask. How are you going to be just a leader here? That kind of attitude is what I would look for, to say, hey, is this somebody who I'm going to trust, who will be leading these airmen, hopefully soon, later, etc. That's kind of what I would be looking for in that interview.
All right, so for me, hands down, stage presence. I want to see what you're looking like on the other side of that table. And that tells me a lot about you. That tells me how much you've poured into yourself under pressure type situations, how much others have poured into you to produce someone who's able to deal with pressure type situations. The answers that you provide. I'm not looking for that perfect answer, but what I am looking for is that whole idea that brevity is elegant, but so is the idea of thoroughness and clarity in the question, and the idea to get that out from in here to out there so that way I can understand it. That's another one of those key factors I'm looking for in future leaders.
All right, awesome. Next question, and we'll start with Chief Z on this one. What question do you think every interviewee should be able to answer, regardless of what type of board he or she is meeting?
What is your leadership style? You should be able to explain to me how you lead people and be able to give me an example of a very good leadership accomplishment that you have had in your career.
Chief Z and I are going to have a lot of same answers. I'm just going to keep it brief. I want to know what your impact is, right? I want to, the same thing. I want to see just why you are uniquely designed for this, what you bring to the table, because I think we mentioned this before, is we're very lucky to be in the Air Force, right? Because in the Air Force, we actually do value you as an individual person. We do value that diversity. We do value kind of all of those things that make you you. So what I want you to be able to bring is show me why you, in your experience, can say, hi, this is why you want me and why only I can have the impact that I'm going to have.
Sweet. So mine is the strengths and weaknesses, because that shows to me that you have self-reflection and introspection, what I think is completely critical to future development of yourself as a leader. 'Cause if you can't do that, you can't expect to be growing others.
Well, to prevent from using their answers, my next biggest would be why here. Like, what is it that makes you want to come to the unit? Because I want to know your interest, and I want to hear if those interests are sincere. Like, if you've thought through that answer, why is it this unit versus another unit that does the exact same thing? Why is it Texas? You know, not that that needs to be answered, but pretty much why here.
So next, and we'll start with Chief Maxey on this one. Without giving names, can you give us a few specific examples of the biggest or most common mistakes you've seen individuals make during a board?
So, Colonel Walters talked about preparing your answers, right? And absolutely do that. What I will, and if you've ever sat on a board with me, I will stop you right in the middle of your sentence if you are giving me a memorized answer that you think I want to hear. If you've ever sat on a board with me, the first thing I say is, hey, there is no wrong answer here, especially if it's an E7, E8, E9. I want to know how you are as a leader, right? Because how you lead, how you've been led is going to be very different. So prepare, but don't memorize. So a good example of this, wing commander's priorities and tactical objectives, right? I love when somebody comes in and tells me a story, how they embody those, right? It's easy for you to pop, easy, too easy, bump, 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 right? No problem, got those memorized, killed that one, right? No, you didn't. I want you to tell me how you're going to say, hey, people first mean something to me, right? Genuinely caring about our airmen means something to me, because that's who we're getting to know, right? We are in the Guard, we're typically together for a few years before I'm meeting you on a board. So if I've done my job, which if you sit on a board, your job is to find out about that person more than that 1 hour that you're gonna spend with them, right? If you've never met them and did not do any homework before that board, then you're not setting that person up for success, right? So definitely come in, make sure that you believe what you're saying, right? And don't tell me what you think I want to hear, because that doesn't let me get to know who you are at all.
All right, so a few examples, the biggest, most common mistakes. Actually, Colonel Walters and I had this one in common because we discussed it yesterday. Unbuttoning of the blues jacket. You wouldn't think it'd be a thing. It happens because I think people get used to wearing like a particular like business coat, and then they undo it. The first thing I'm thinking is, oh, this is gonna be really interesting when they get up to see how they put that thing back together again. Of course, they don't. They stand there, they salute, and everything's all spread open, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to mind our presence when it comes to that. Additionally, the answers that you give. Again, being Kelly Beanism here, the strengths and weaknesses. Often you get these canned answers, like the chief was just alluding to, like, well, what's one of your weaknesses? I care too much. What does that even mean? or I'm not good at time management. You and every other turkey vulture in this entire room, struggles with time management every single day. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that tells me that you've actually thought about who you are and that you know what you're trying to overcome and where you're striving to be. So I'll leave that there. Awesome.
Stories. That's a big thing. The canned answers, like I said, it's who cares if you can memorize some things that you know are going to be on there somewhere, sometime. Not being able to understand from a technical aspect some of the stuff that you need to know, and or how to relate the stuff that they're going to expect you to know back with stuff that you've already done. Because just about everyone in here has got some sort of experience that plays into whatever role you're going to. Because if not, then you probably wouldn't be looking for this next opportunity. And so being able to relate your past experience to stuff that you want to show them that you're capable of, and then tying that into your technical knowledge associated with what you're coming into. So the example I have, I'm the example, when I was interviewing for the job here, I knew that MQ1 was a platform that had its own launch and recovery element, that had an MCE, but I had never heard the acronyms as LRE, MCE. And one of the last questions I received on the board was, hey, super quick, would you be able to deploy in support of LRE operations? And I was like, I deployed almost 10 times. I'm good with the deployment. What's LRE? And it's a big deal to not understand what that is. And as soon as I got off the phone, with the board, because I had a call in, I immediately looked it up and I was like, oh, how did I miss that? And it's one of those things where even though prior preparation, I missed out on that. So just again, having the technical knowledge.
Remember that when you come in front of a board, you've probably submitted a board package for promotion or for that position. In that board package, there's a letter of intent, presumably written by you. Okay? So I'm going to read that letter of intent, and ask you questions about it. Tell me what you're going to do if we promote you or give you this position. You should be able to articulate from that letter of intent, what you've done. I have seen numerous times where an airman responses, I'm not aware of that, or I've never heard of that before, and it's like, well, that's what that's what it says you were interested in doing, or that was a goal of yours, or something like that. So be familiar with your own package that you send to the board, because we are going to be looking at that many times, often throughout the interview process. So be prepared for questions from that.
All right, thanks. Colonel Bean, to you first. What one piece of advice would you give to anyone going into a board within the Air National Guard?
2 words, just be prepared. You hit on that a lot earlier, Colonel Walters, but that's been my personal motto as I've gone into boards as long as I can remember, is going in. I don't prepare the day before, I don't prepare the week before. I start preparing weeks, if not sometimes months before, depending when I know. That provides me the opportunity. We've all done this, right? Where we stay up to the last minute to write a paper, and then we turn it in and we were like, oh yeah, and then we get that B+, that A-, like, oh, that was good, whatever. But you go back and you read it, and you're like, oh, and you see all the things you missed out on. That's how I feel about when you're going to go in front of a board, right? Give yourself time to think through who you are, to think through, your objectives, what you're trying to meet, and the potential questions that they could answer. Give yourself time to think through these things, so when the board actually happens, you're not so stressed. You can have that stage presence. You can go back and that stuff is caged and fresh in your mind, and you don't have to sit there and think too long about it, because it's already there. You've already done the homework because you're prepared.
Preparation. I wrote on here, it's like exercise. If you're not doing the proper preparation beforehand, and it goes beyond just knowing or thinking about what it is that you're going to have to answer. Some of the things that I'll do, like Colonel Walters pointed out, is I'll go and visit the space that I'm going to do the interview in. Because how many have been in an interview where you're supposed to report in and the chair is weird? or the fun cases where the chair just isn't where it's supposed to be, because that's part of the test, right? So going to those spaces, getting to know some of the faces that may be involved, even if it's just the people that you're going to be checking in with. Having a face that you're familiar with will help you on that interview day, because I've seen probably hundreds of people in our hallway getting ready to do an interview that look nervous as can be, and they're talking at that point like, oh, okay, well, am I going to knock? And the boards do a good job of trying to prep people, but if your preparation occurs 10 minutes or even 30 seconds before you walk in, then you're already at a disadvantage, because there are a lot of things in your head that are going to happen in like the first 30 seconds of that interview that are probably not going to go how you expected them to go, unless you kind of chair flew through everything that you had in there.
I would recommend that you volunteer to sit on a board, right? Be on the good side of the table, if you will. And then also in your mock boards, get out of your own squadron. Mock board with mission support group, or with CE, or with ops, or get out of your own culture where everybody thinks you're a superstar. And then this way you'll get to know more people who might be sitting on the panel, and you'll also get different questions because they might ask different questions in security forces than they do in aircraft maintenance. So give yourself a chance by broadening your preparation.
I would say, don't lose the fight before you step in the ring, right? We hear so often, they're not gonna get me. I'm not this. I don't have enough of this. You got selected, right? So be confident in who you are, be respectfully but unapologetically you, right? There's a reason that you were selected to board for this position, this promotion, civilian world, or whatever. You, just in who you are, bring something unique to the table, and just be confident in that, right? So don't lose that before you walk in. And then my second point always is what you do after the board is just as important as before and during, right? That attitude you have after the board is going to make an impact as well, because you're now meeting 4 people, 3 people, 2 people that have many other contacts other places. Lots of opportunities come up all the time that you may not have been good for this, but you're good for that, you know, and now you're a face to me, right? If you sit on a board, that's you saying that, hey, I'm now invested in this person's development. You know, I now know this person, I'm gonna look for opportunities. Boards are development opportunities for both of us, right? I learn about you, I learn about an asset that I have on my team. So after that board, make sure you keep that positive attitude. You keep kind of going forward and wanting to do whatever that next step is for whatever the next chapter is.
Yeah, and I'll say as a guy who has only been in the wing for a year, the boards I've sat on, I have learned about both officer and enlisted individually in that 20, 30, 40 minutes that we spend together. It's been very helpful. So even if you're not quite sure that you're a shoe-in and they're going to select you, A-game effort is never a failing strategy. So let's now got about 20 minutes left. Let's see. Any questions around the room for the panel? Go ahead, Chief.
I have one for the panel. So I've prepared for many boards and been reasonably successful. I mean, if I was a baseball player, they'd pay me millions of dollars. So about a third of the time I've been successful. A third of the time I'm not. And I think most of us have similar type experience there. And I feel like I've prepared well for most boards. But every once in a while, I'll show up to a board, and I can think of 2 specific examples. I'm not going to share them, but I can think of 2 specific examples where I sat in the chair and I was asked a question, not necessarily a technical question, but a question that just stumped me, flumped, like I just didn't have, I couldn't come up with something. Can you share your experience in a similar situation, and were you able to overcome it? If so, how? And if not, is that what torpedoed your experience?
I'll give it a shot here. So when I interviewed for the command chief job, the first question they asked me was, what was the hardest decision I ever had to do? The day before we had to put our family dog down. I was almost in tears. That's how I started this process. I didn't even get an intro warm-up question because they forgot to do that. And they apologized later on in the interview, but so we started with, what was the toughest decision you ever had to do? So I had to overcome that, Chief. And I honestly, I just came up, I reached into my toolkit, sir, and I pulled out some BS that I don't even recall, but it apparently worked, right? But it was tough, and that the point of this is it happens at the highest level, right, of the enlisted structure. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to any one of you. And the best thing you can do is just to try to move forward. You always have the opportunity to say, can you rephrase that question, or can I come back to that question a little bit later? You can always do that as well. That would be my suggestion to that.
Anybody else?
I was just thinking that you see that as a board member, you see that pretty often, and you just feel to some extent so bad when you're on that side and you see that, because you don't want them to fail. You want to see everyone just do a great job and kill it and give you the best possible performance of their career. But often enough that does happen, even with the people who you hold in the highest regard. And I think that there's times where I can look back on all the interviews that I've done, and I always have never nailed it. There's always been something that I left, sometimes more than just something. Beat myself up about it. And all I can then hope at that point in time is that my reputation and credibility over the years in an organization which I've worked will carry me through that. Because what you do every day matters, right? Not just not the day of the interview. You've got years, of what people know you. The hard part is if you're coming to an interview where no one knows you. But that kind of goes back to even making those simple connections at the beginning with where you want to be. So.
I think it kind of goes back to his know thyself thing. I didn't know if that was just like a Nancy pause. Same thing. Command Chief Board, they ask, what's your bias? So just FYI, that might be a question for in a board in the future, and you're just like, what do you mean? That's not what I studied. How do you study a bias, So, but that's kind of why we say, like, hey, you walk in there and you know who you are, right? And because similarly, you're talking to a board of people who I think I can speak on behalf of you guys, say we look at boards as investments in you. You're not always going to meet that kind of board. You will potentially meet a board that is going to ask you gotcha questions, that is going to say, what was the 2017 Dang's third priority that he redacted, and you know what I'm saying, and you see them all writing, and so that's when you have to know, what do I want to bring to the table? That's a great question. I need to research that, because that's definitely one of my strengths as a researcher, and that's why I bring value here, so that's your opportunity to do a little mentoring to the board yourself, so again, just taking a second and saying, okay, this is what I think the answer may be. And then also, as a person who is boarded, if you don't know and you say you're going to get back to us, do get back to us, right? That we really want to know what your thoughts are. So yeah.
I like the way she phrased it. She mentored the board, right? So I like to think, when I've run into those situations, that's what I've done. I've mentored the board. Really, I've BS'd my way out of some of the questions that I really didn't know an answer to. And it's like, you don't want to give a BS question, and by that, it's not that it was just completely off the wall, but in some cases, I've had to say, hey, I'm not sure if this is the question you're asking, but if it is, this is how I would answer it. And I've answered, and I haven't had any feedback that has said otherwise, that, like, hey, you completely bombed it. Or I did it so bad that they're like, okay, let's just move on.
I think what I would add here for everybody is what one of you alluded to, and that is that what we do in that 30 minutes, in most cases in the Air National Guard, is you're not a completely unknown quantity in the room for two reasons. Number one, because if you're interviewing here locally, well, we probably know you and have work experience with you previously, and that matters much more than anything you say or don't say in the room is due if I know you and know your quality over the course of a long period of time. Or secondly, I, as a chief, or I, as a colonel, have called other chiefs or other colonels or other senior NCOs, and I have asked what they think about you, and so I have some kind of informed opinion. In the times where for me, I definitely have had multiple times where I have not had a great answer, but having the gift of gab, I came up with some kind of answer and then moved on. It may not have been awesome. But I would also mention in that moment that you should not be afraid to take 5-7 seconds to just sit there in a little bit of awkward silence, gather your thoughts, and during that time, what I am doing is I am not stalling. I am preparing my answer and thinking through that toolbox that I have sitting beside me in my mind. That I'm going, all right, well, what of the things I know of myself, or my accomplishments, or what I know about the world in which we live, or the process methodology things I've studied, can I pull out to help aid me in answering this question? Good one. All right, go ahead, Major.
So this regard is regarding the TMAP. So with moving toward TMAP, and now potentially in the room going to the in-person and focusing on in-person interviews. How do you think that this is going to be affecting the interview process? And then also, can you provide those tips, since it's going to be more than likely maybe calling them over the phone? And what would you do differently from an in-person board, because you can't see them to match their ribbon rack, you can't see their stage presence, you can't see what maybe their uniform looks like?
Sweet. So thanks for asking that question, especially with TMAP still being new and a lot of people still not understanding that it's supposed to be a developmental process. So not just a, hey, it's easier for us to hire. It's like anything else right now. It's going to continue to evolve, right? And I know we've seen growing pains. I've heard lots of growing pains on the enlisted side. Haven't heard as many on the officer side, and there are different aspects that are associated with each of those. We've also tried to, hey, how many levels of rank are we going to include in this, and what's the proper scaling? And with all of that, one of the things that you point out is in some cases it takes the board, it can take the board completely out of the process, other than everything that you put in to your data sheet, right? And we don't want that. We want to be able to know who it is we're hiring also on a personal level. So I know there have been different implementations. I think for the 181st Airlift Squadron, they did their TMAP. They came up with their rack and stack, but they're still going to do a board, and those are still options. And in any of these cases, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, you can still board as a commander or a supervisor or do any of those. And if that's what you want to maintain, then that's great. The nice part is that TMAP offers you the flexibility to not have to do that based on all these other variables. Now with the not in person, via Teams or whatever other avenue you're using, that's something that we I feel like have gotten more used to ever since having to do so, since 2020. And I think we've gotten a lot more successful at it. We still have plenty of, room to go to make that a success overall. And there's something about seeing someone eye to eye in the same room and, gripping and grinning and actually shaking hands and meeting people. That's always going to have its own authenticity that you're going to need. But I think we'll keep working through those. So hopefully that gives you something.
Anybody else? Chief?
TMAP is an evolving process, right? So don't see the dead face, right? Like it's great. But we want that feedback, right? So what you don't know is that the original turnaround time that was given was 3 days, right? And we've really pushed really hard. So now you see the last 2 quarters, you've had 10 days turnarounds. We want you to do that interview. So just that's the thing. TMAP is the board, right? You as a commander have that discretion, and we want you to, because like we said, we value that culture, that individuality. We want you to interview. We want you to call them and say, we want you to FaceTime them, Google Meet, Teams it, whatever you want to do, because that's important. So, and if it's not working, then let us know, right? Because we are creating this process as we're doing it. So that's for everybody, enlisted officer, like that. Let's make it the right process, because I think we do have the breathing room right now to do it. Not overnight, right? But eventually, by the time we're all gone, it's going to be perfect. So, but yeah, so thank you for that feedback, and do keep it coming. And yes, please do interview your candidates, please.
We have time for one more question. Who wants it? Go ahead.
I'm Rochelle Cupstick, and all this information has been wonderful. But can you give me some tips on how to recover from a mistake or a flub? If I report and say I tripped coming in, and now I'm flustered and I want to start over, is it frowned upon and just say, give me a moment, let me walk out, try it again? Or do I power through and keep going? What does the board, what's the answer?
I say power through. I mean, because you're not going to get redos when it comes to, the job necessarily, and if you trip, you trip. Like, life is life. You're going to hit bumps in the road, and if you hit those bumps in the road, to me, if, say you trip completely, ribbons go everywhere, if you can pick yourself up still do everything you can to maintain a good reporting in, and maintain, it's gonna be hard, to maintain your composure and everything else. But if you can do that, then that speaks volumes to your ability to do the same kind of thing in a stressful situation. Because, I don't know about you guys, but I've dealt with a few stressful situations. And so if you can do that in the interview and then make everything as clean on the way out and through the interview, then I would say that that's a win.
This is a good question for everybody to give an answer to. Chief, go ahead, take a shot.
So Rochelle, one of the things all of you are going to have an opportunity when the board is over to have a final comment. So besides thanking the board for their time, you can readdress. I just want to cover the fact that I actually can walk and chew gum at the same time, sir, ma'am. I can do that. I apologize for that earlier. It wasn't my best self. Or, I think I screwed up an answer earlier. I want to come back to that and say that I do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, so, you have a chance. You have a chance to recover. Yeah, I agree with what Colonel French said. You have to power through at the moment. You can't ask for a redo entry, but you can circle back at later on in the interview before you leave the room. You make sure that this panel knows everything you want them to know. Don't walk out of the door thinking I should have told them about that thing. Yeah, you should have. That could have been helpful. So you have that opportunity in the closing statement to readdress anything you need to.
Chief Master.
My question at the end of every board is, do I trust my most broken airman with you, right? Whatever you do after that trip, if at the end of this interview I know that I can trust my most broken airman with you, I'm not gonna remember. It'll be a funny story later when you're the chief and I'm coming to your promotion ceremony, right? But if you in that interview, what you're there to tell me is how you're gonna take care of my airman.
So when you asked that question, the first thing I thought of was like a track race. We've all seen it where once the gun goes off and the person pulls a hamstring or they fall or something happens, and then instantly you're like, oh. But once in a while, what happens? The person gets up and they just take off, right? And we've seen it times where they've won and they've come back. And I think just like I was saying earlier to Chief, the board on the other side, 99.9% of the time wants to see you be victorious. So know that and keep that kind of idea in your mind that the board wants to see you win. So when you fall at the beginning, because your chocks were slippery, or you got a bad handoff or whatever it was, the board is hoping, the board is looking for it, almost anticipating like a good end to a movie that you're going to close it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to give each panel member a chance to make a few closing remarks. Leave us with a thing or two that you want us to know before we roll out the door here, and then I'll do the same and we'll close it down. Chief Z.
Just thank you for your time. And I encourage all of you to do well on interviews. Prepare, go to mock boards, and I do agree with a comment that was made earlier that the board wants to see you succeed. If you're up for a promotion board, you only have to beat yourself. That's it. There's no other competition. So just all of you can be extraordinarily successful in boards. Pay attention to this sheet of paper. Get on some mock boards. Do yourself a favor. You'll be fine. Thank you.
Get out and about. I know a lot of faces in here, and I know a lot of faces in here because I try and get out and about. And getting to know people around the base, getting to know people in the other wings, getting to know people up at state will help you tenfold, and not only you, but it'll help the people that you're with, because you'll be able to make contacts that they might not be able to make, and you'll know who to call when either you have a problem, someone else has a problem. So do your best to get out there and get to know other people throughout the wing. And it also prevents the mentality that, hey, look, the med group is like this, the ops group is like this, the MSG is like this. We're all one team, one fight here, so let's start acting like it and get out and go see people.
So from my perspective, this hour has been mighty fine, spending with every single one of you. Thank you for taking the time out of a super busy drill to share it with all of us. I think most of you know where I live, building 1057, main floor. If you have any questions or want to come see me afterwards at any point in time, door is always open to you. And kind of echoing what the chief had said earlier, Chief Z, about the mock boards. I took every opportunity. Part of it was I really wanted to help out Sergeant Aguilar because that poor girl tried to, get people on boards. Remember that? She's always trying to solicit to fill boards. I felt so bad to hear and see that same message go out and out again, so I always volunteered. And you know what? That was the best thing I could have done because while I thought it was like, oh, it's a waste of my time, 3 hours out of the day, carving it out, it ended up being the nuggets that you gain sitting on the other side will prepare you for the most successful board of your future. So definitely volunteer to sit on the other side of those boards and help out the wing in the process.
I think I would just say this is just my experience, right? When these questions came up, you probably thought of a good or a bad experience, and so help be part of what you want it to look like. It's going to be your ideas that happen next. The boards are going to look like what you make them be. It's this room who will be sitting on the boards, right? So what we say, if that works for you, great, but bring what you want to see successful. Take those bad and good experiences and make them better for that next behind you. So, just thanks for your time.
Thanks. Let's give a round of applause to our panel members. Thank you very much. What I would leave you with is we gave you some guiding principles for the day. Every time you have board members that sit on the other side of you when you're the interviewee, every person is a little different. So you got some good guiding principles. But each time you walk in a room, it's a little different. So the better prepared you are, absolutely, that's true. Thank you for investing time. You being here today shows me that you are caring it and concerned about growing it and your own development and those around you developing as well. So with that in mind, the 5 of us are going to hang out up here for a little while. If you have any question you did not get a chance to ask, we certainly welcome it after the meeting is over. Thanks for your time. Carry on.